Hello, and welcome to the midterm review for URP 475. So let's begin with the first question. What is globalization? Well, by this stage, I think you're probably up to your ears in this question. But globalization is primarily an economic system, and that economic system is predicated upon a certain type of trade. And what is that type of trade? It's comparative advantage. And this is also, by the way, asked of you in question 18 as well. So globalization is primarily an economic system that is based on comparative advantage and specialization. And the basic idea is that as countries specialize and trade with each other, this results in better goods, cheaper goods, and an increasing quantity of goods. This also creates interdependency between countries, and it also creates an exchange of not just economics, or rather things that are related to economics, goods, services, money, so on, but also of culture and ideas and worldviews, religion, government, and so on. So globalization is the increasing integration of the world in terms of the economy, but it's also an increasing integration of the world in terms of other things. What is mercantile colonialism? For this, you would have to look at the history of globalization lectures, but basically this is the exploitation of one country by another, and this happened in the 1800s, 1700s, primarily European powers that engaged in this extraction of raw materials from countries that they occupied, and then selling back finished goods to the same countries. Right, and so why was this profitable? Well, in many cases, it just took the resources. Imagine going to a country and not having to pay for resources that you use to make a finished good that you sell back to that country. Why does globalization and cities? What is the relationship there? Globalization favors cities. I've talked quite a bit about this in previous lectures. So really think about why does globalization favor cities? What kinds of things do cities offer that both increase the speed of globalization? And how does globalization actually impact the growth of urbanization or cities throughout the world? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with markets, right? Cities have lots of markets. Cities allow for specialization. Cities are not based on subsistence types of living. Who are the winners and losers? For this, again, you would have to refer back to the lecture slides. Of course, for all of these questions, the assumption is that you are looking at all the materials that have been posted. But who are the winners and losers in globalization? Well, many countries have won. Rich countries have won. Developed countries have won. China has won. India has won. Who has lost? Some sub-Saharan African countries have lost. Some of the poor countries in Southeast Asia have lost. Or rather, they have not benefited as much from the quote-unquote rising tide that is supposed to help everybody. Marx, Smith, Ricardo, who are they? What did they contribute? Marx. This is the base and superstructure model of society. For Marx, the most important thing was the economic mode of production of a society, and everything else came from that. Marx also talks about class conflict, right? That increasingly capital or money will be bound up in the hands of fewer and fewer people, thereby exacerbating class conflict. Adam Smith talks about the invisible hand of the market, right? He's sort of the first person to really theorize the market and talk about how the market results in optimal solutions. David Ricardo came up with comparative advantage, right? And there are others also that I talk about in class lecture. Why do we study economics? Why is it important? Well, this question is kind of self-evident, as economics is the underpinning of, right? It underpins our understanding of globalization. Economics deals with allocation of resources. What are resources? Resources could be anything. Resources could be things that are found in their natural form, and this is natural resources, or even finished products, or skills, right? Different countries have skills as resources, as opposed to natural resources. Like a country like Singapore has very few natural resources. A country like Japan has natural resources. But at the same time, they have a lot of skilled labor. That itself is a resource. What is a market? Again, we study economics, we do study markets. Markets are basically a place where you can buyers and sellers come together and to buy and sell goods and services. Assumptions of a market. Well, these are articulated again for you in the lecture notes, but basically markets have to be transparent. They have to be free of coercion. Buyers and sellers should be allowed to leave. There should be regulations that prevent monopolies. Any of the things that prevent the ideal assumptions of a market from happening can cause market failure. For example, if you have a monopoly, a company gets too big, right, and crowds out all others. For example, some could argue that Facebook and Google to some extent are becoming monopolies, and this is the argument that was made actually recently. Why are they becoming so big? Well, they were the first sort of players in this arena of information or social media. They were not the first, but they're the ones who survived, and they've become so big as a consequence that they basically, are the go-to for, if you're trying to look up information on the internet, you go to Google. Really, I mean, it's become an adjective now, right? You Google, or rather, it's become a verb. You Google something. Same thing with Facebook, over 1 billion users. And so the impact of this is pretty profound. You can see recent news, a few million, I think 10 million people were subjected to quote unquote propaganda from Russian bots during the election cycle. So if you have one source of information or social media where people are getting their data from, you can see why that kind of monopoly could be very damaging, not only to democracy, but also to competition and ultimately the consumer, who will pay a higher price for all of these monopolistic type behaviors. The difference between a centrally planned economy and one based on the free market. A centrally planned economy is akin to what existed in the former Soviet Union, where central planners basically decided how many goods and services and the allocation of goods and services. The free market, in contrast, is where consumer demand basically determines what is produced and the price for that, right? So free market is more responsive in real time to the whims and the vagaries, as we say, or rather demand, right? Demand and supply determine what is made and the price for goods and services. How do you measure inefficiency? One of the best ways to measure inefficiencies is basically shown in your lecture here, is that an economy or a company becomes inefficient when it's basically doing less for more, or you're producing the same good but using a lot more resources, or you're using the same amount of resources as, let's say, another company or another country, but producing far fewer goods. So that is inefficiency. What are externalities? Externalities are another way of basically talking about things or people that are harmed or impacted in a negative way by an economic transaction. So an example would be, let's say you buy plastic or you use plastic bags. Now you're willing to pay a certain price to use those plastic bags. And the price of those plastic bags reflects the demand for the plastic bags. However, you take the plastic bag home and then you're supposed to recycle it. In many cases it doesn't. It goes into your trash can, doesn't get recycled, it goes on the street, ends up in the ocean or the North Pacific Gyre, where the plastic deteriorates, ends up in the bellies of the various animals that are in the ocean. So who suffers ultimately from your choice of plastic bags? It's not you really, it's the environment, or more specifically ocean life. So the externality here in this case is the impact on the ocean life. The ocean life has no say in your economic transaction. It's not part of that or privy to that. On the other hand, it is impacted negatively by that. Opportunity cost. How's it related to efficiency, waste, and standard of living? Well, this is the one actually I want you to read. There's a whole slide on this, but basically this is opportunity cost deals with not just your direct cost, but also what you give up when you go down a particular road. It's indirect cost, and this is absolutely essential to understanding comparative advantage. What is need, and how is need is need fixed? Need is determined on, well, it's kind of what you want actually. Need is not necessarily fixed. Now, we have baseline needs for food, shelter, water, sleep, and so on. Think of Maslow's pyramid of needs. But beyond that, really, you don't need much else to survive beyond those baseline calories or water or sleep. You can exist, right? So whether you live in a 1-bedroom house or a 5-bedroom house is a function not of your need, but it's a function of your wants. Price and relationship to allocation of resources. Again, this is linked to economics, markets, why we use economics and why do we study markets. But price basically is, classical economic sense, the intersection of the supply and demand curves, right? So that's a complicated way of saying that people are willing to pay a certain amount of price for a certain amount of goods, and suppliers are willing to supply a certain amount of goods for that price. And where those two meet is sort of the equilibrium price or the market price for that. And price really helps us understand how resources are allocated. Like, for example, if you have wood, right, trees, right? What is a tree? It's a natural resource. So what can a tree be used for? It can be used for paper. It can be used for building materials, right? It can be used for nothing, just enjoying nature. What determines what that tree will be used for? It determines on the demand for the various goods that the tree can provide and the price associated with those goods. So if the price for let's say homes is a lot, people who cut down trees, the people who are the forest and cut down trees are going to sell their trees to people who make 2x4s and 2x6s and wood, and then other framing members for out of that, as opposed to selling to the paper mill, right? So the price will determine that, right? The willingness to pay for a certain commodity, goods or services is indexed by price. What are profits and the relationship of profits to efficiency? Well, the more efficient you are, the more profits you can make, right? Well, kind of. That's not the whole story. Profits are basically what's left over after you paid off all your input costs, right? So what is your profit a function of? Well, that's a function of willingness to pay. For example, do you really know how much your iPhone really costs? But you are really willing to pay whatever the price is. That happens to be north of $1,000 now. But do you know how much it costs? You actually don't know how much it costs, right? But other phones cost in the same sort of price range, and you are more than willing to bear that price. So that is the price of the iPhone and other similar phones. So the profits in this case for an iPhone might be a lot because the input costs might be much less. If you are aware of the input costs, your willingness to pay for the phone might actually be a lot less. You might not be willing to pay $1,000 if you know the phone costs, for example, only $100 to make, right? Because you might feel that you're getting gypped. Somebody is actually kind of fleecing you. Economies of scale and the relationship to efficiency. Well, economies of scale. The more efficient you become, the more you make of something, the bigger you are, the more efficiency you create. So the more economies of scale you have, the more efficiently you can make products. Absolute advantage, and its sister concept, comparative advantage. Absolute advantage when, again, there are slides on this, but it's basically when a country or a region or even a person can do something more efficiently for cheaper. They have an absolute advantage. Comparative advantage, in contrast, and I'm going to let you look this up, and there's videos on both of these, and try to understand this concept. But comparative advantage instead deals with not just direct costs, but also indirect costs or opportunity costs. And globalization says you should specialize in those things that you have a comparative advantage for, right? And then because you will do those things so well, that you'll make so much money that you can buy everything else. Inflation, tendency of the prices for goods and services to rise with time. Deflation, exact opposite. Which is worse? I will let you think about this, but I'll give you a hint. Some amount of inflation, 1% to 2%, 3% is actually considered normal. So what one do you think is worse? What happens when the prices of goods and services are falling over time? The economy contracts. Okay, banking system, what does it do? There's a whole series of slides as well as videos on this that deal with fractional reserve banking. It's important that you understand that. What is fractional reserve banking and the role of the Federal Reserve? That's question number 21 and 22. What does the Federal Reserve have to do with fractional reserve banking? And the three different mechanisms the Federal Reserve, and there's three of them, that the Federal Reserve uses to exercise its monetary policy. Right? Monetary policy deals with the supply of money. Fiscal policy, number 23, deals with everything else. Remember, monetary policy is, what are those three things again? Give you a hint, it has to do with bonds. It has to do with the reserve ratio. It has to do with the overnight interest rate. What is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy has to do with everything else. What is everything else? Tax credits. What is everything else? Rebates. What is everything else? Tax deductions. Everything else the government does to make you do certain things. Fiscal policy. How do we measure income? Lots of different ways to do that, right? Household income, GDP, purchasing power parity adjustments, per capita income. Why do we make these PPP, purchasing power parity adjustments? Why do we do that? Remember, things don't always cost the same in different countries. So making $10 in India, for example, is not the same thing as making $10 here. So we have to make these PPP adjustments. Per capita income, what is it? How do we measure it? Give you a hint. It has to do with GDP and population. Why is it important? Well, if we know how much money per person that we have, it gives us some indication of the wealth, and to a lesser degree, maybe the distribution of wealth in a society. But it gives us a sense of how wealthy a place is. Securitization, and what role does it play in the economy? There's a bunch of slides on quantitative easing that talk about securitization, but basically it's taking up all debt, bundling it up together, and selling it on the market. These are securities. And then this concept is related to quantitative easing. You hear of QE1, QE2, QE3, and so on. But basically, this is when the Federal Reserve increases the liquidity in markets. It buys up debt. Now, there's different ways that it does that. I'll let you read about this and figure that out. But Federal Reserve initially was only tasked with buying bonds, U.S. government bonds. But as the market, the economy stagnated and it was trying to sort of jumpstart it, it was trying to get banks to lend more money. How do you get banks to lend more money? You buy up the notes. Remember, when you go out to get a student loan or a mortgage loan or some other type of loan, personal loan with the bank, you reduce the cash supply the bank has on hand, right? How? Because the bank has loaned you the cash. Well, how does the bank get the cash back? It sells that debt to the Federal Reserve. Quantitative easing. Externalities, here it is again. Oh, well, it's when bad stuff happens to things that are not part of a economic transaction. Liberalization and structural reforms, what are they? Well, liberalization has to do with moving away from a centrally planned economy, moving away from protectionist measures. For example, sometimes countries will protect nascent or new industries. And that actually might be okay. Paul Krugman says that that's kind of an acceptable thing. You should do that in the beginning. But increasing protectionism, as right now Trump, for example, has levied a bunch of tariffs on certain imported goods, that is protectionism. So people who are exporting these goods to the United States are crying foul, right? So why did Trump do this? Well, basically to protect industries at home, or give them a competitive advantage. But this is the exact opposite of liberalization. Liberalization means open markets, not barriers to the market. Structural reforms, a related concept, is when countries have to take steps to basically ease their way into the neoliberal regime or the global capitalist regime that exists in today's world. It's the reforms that must be taken to stabilize currency, to open up your markets, to reduce protectionist measures, to combat inflation, and basically become a player in the global and globalizing, or rather globalization. And the thinking is that as you undertake these structural reforms, your country will it'll be difficult because people will suffer, but in the long run, markets will become more efficient and you will become more prosperous. Has this always happened? No, actually, it has not happened in the way that what's the next question? IMF, World Bank, and WTO have conceptualized. IMF International Monetary Fund in particular urged liberalization, structural reforms. And this is the story before China sort of came on the world stage. And they said that to all these poor countries, implement liberalization, structural reforms. You will suffer in the beginning, but in the long run, you'll become better. But what happened was, who benefited? When countries open up their markets, who benefits? It's the people who are already established. For example, you are making clothes in a poor country. Now you open up your markets, all of a sudden you have Walmart and other large producers, industrial producers of clothes come into your country and start competing with local producers of clothes. What happens to the local producers of clothes? They don't have economies of scale, they don't have efficiency, they don't have access to the same capital markets that these large producers do. As a result, they are no longer able to compete with the large players, and they become even poorer. In the long run, the idea is that cheaper goods and services of higher quality will make their way into the country. In the short run, people suffer. So enters China. China says, we will undertake a structural reforms, liberalization, but we'll do it our way. We'll do it in a way that actually allows our people to sort of learn the ways of the international economy, to enter globalization in a way that doesn't make them very, very poor in the beginning. So China implemented a lot of steps to do that, and some of these are discussed in the lecture notes. It required that companies that come in and invest in China teach skills to local producers. It guaranteed a basic price level for certain goods and services. So for example, if you were a Chinese farmer and you were selling your goods all of a sudden to the rest of the world, and you were competing with large agribusinesses, right? Now remember, agribusiness in the U.S. are subsidized. So they produce tons of food very cheaply, and now you're the poor farmer in China. You can't compete with that same, U.S. produced rice or whatever. So Chinese initially guaranteed a certain price level for that farmer, so he wouldn't starve, she wouldn't starve, right? And they insisted on knowledge transfer, and they more recently, they have engaged in the practice of sort of strong arm state intervention in their financial markets to compel their lenders to lend, right? Now this would never happen like in the United States. The government can't come in and tell Wells Fargo to lend like overtly as the Chinese government has done. But the result of that was that China was able to come out of the recession a lot faster and sort of sustain their growth. The criticism of that is that they've created giant asset bubbles in various markets. But anyway, that's another story. China did it differently. That's the point I'm trying to make. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. World Bank makes a lot of loans for like large infrastructure type projects, like building a dam or something like that. IMF provides a lot of advice for monetary policy, right? What are the currency related measures that a country should take? It basically advises countries on things that have to do with money supply and banking and integration into the financial system, insurance, bonds, things of that sort. World Bank makes loans for infrastructure projects, other things, but that's what it's kind of known for. And then WTO, World Trade Organization. This is the successor organization to General Agreement for Trades and Tariffs, GATT. But basically, they're the mediating organization for trade disputes, right? Trade disputes. China has closed off its markets, for example, to foreign DVDs or foreign movie purveyors like Hollywood. But Hollywood, got kind of pissed off at China because a lot of black market DVDs were making their way in anyway. So the film industry here was saying it's unfair. The Chinese are watching our films anyway, but doing it to the black market way. WTO, please issue a ruling here that allows at least us to compete on a level playing field in China. And so WTO was involved in mediating this kind of trade dispute. Okay, those are all the questions for the economy that exist. I do hope you have reviewed the demography section. I will ask a few questions on demography as well. Nothing too crazy, but if you've been through the video portion of the lecture and the notes, you should do fine as well. In particular, pay attention to age structure, dependency ratio, life expectancy, fertility rate, and that's it. No, I may ask a few other questions as well, but those are sort of the big concepts that I want you to understand. Again, what are they? For demography, age structure, fertility rate, life expectancy, and dependency ratio. All right, good luck with the exam.